Greetings. Welcome to F4 Live. With me is Josef Olmert. Josef Olmert is a professor of Middle Eastern Studies. He's been an official for the Israeli government. He's a very distinguished scholar and thinker. He also happens to be the brother of the former Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert. So a very distinguished academic and someone with an idea of politics. Josef, welcome.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome, sir. So without further ado, Josef, what is going on?
What's going on right now is that we are at the 10th, I believe, day of this war between Israel and the movement, which is political, but much more so military, that I consider, and I think that many Israelis consider to be a Nazi-style organization. It's a very difficult situation because Israel was surprised and Israel failed in the very early hours of this situation. But right now, just to get into the current situation, there is the counter-offensive or counter-attack of the Israeli defense forces in the Gaza area with talks about preparations for a ground assault, which I personally doubt that will happen, definitely not as a full-scale ground assault as people perceive it to be or talk about it. There is mostly an aerial activity, but also from some support by shelling from the ground and from the sea, and with some operations apparently, as I'm told, by special units in areas adjacent to the border between Israel and Gaza. And according to what I understand, and it may be wrong, these aerial attacks are devastating to the infrastructure and to the governing structure of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, but, and I have to say, but are not yet even close to a complete demolition of Hamas, as was stated to be the goal of all that by the Netanyahu government. So we are therefore at a stage where the Israelis are still exercising their overall obvious aerial superiority and technological superiority, but the results of all that, while they might be devastating to the situation in Gaza altogether, are not yet ones that come up or fulfill the stated goal of this campaign to demolish Hamas completely. And if I may, they talk now about a possible visit by President Biden in Israel on, say, Wednesday or Thursday, or maybe Wednesday to Thursday, which indicates to me that the IDF may not have more than 72 hours, 48 to 72 hours to do what they do now, because the visit will halt, at least temporarily, major military activities, and maybe, I will talk about it later, I believe, maybe will create dynamics that will lead to some kind of political discussions and therefore a moderation of the military situation. So to sum up your first question, I would say the Israeli counteroffensive is in full gear right now. The results are satisfactory, but not decisive. And the next stage depends to a large extent, I would say, on the background to the visit of and the aftermath of the visit of President Biden, if indeed it will take place, which seems very possible, but not yet certain.
So an uncertain situation. Now, you said Hamas is Nazi-like. Now, I've read their charter. It is a frightening charter, but many of our viewers and many of our listeners do not know much about Hamas, do not know about this charter. So please walk them through why you call Hamas to be a Nazi-like organization.
I will first of all define what they are and then what they have become.
Brilliant.
Because the charter is genocidal against Israel. They simply say Israel has no right to exist. And obviously, when you say that a state doesn't have a right to exist, and this state wants to exist, the only way in order to get rid of the state is to have a genocide, a war that would lead to its total destruction. This is a fundamentalist Islamic movement that is definitely define itself as a Palestinian to start with, but not only. In the tradition of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the mother movement of is Hamas. Hamas, by the way, are a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood by their own charter. They
Muslim
define themselves
Brotherhood
first.
of Egypt, started
Yeah,
by
well,
Hassan
the
al-Banna.
Muslim Brotherhood of Egypt, that's my point here, also do not define themselves as an Egyptian movement because, in Islam, the most important form of collective identity is the unity of the believers, not ethnicity, not language, or not race.
Ummah.
So it is like the Ummah, the Islamic Ummah.
Yeah.
So Hamas is definitely a fundamentalist Islamic movement, jihadists in the Senate, they want to destroy Israel.
Yeah.
And they started their activities as Hamas in the late 1980s, at a time when there was a growing up of fundamentalist Islamic movements all over the world as a result of the Afghanistan war and what seemed to be the success of the counter-Soviet jihad, I would remind you that one of the main ideologues, by the way, of Al-Qaeda was a Palestinian himself, even though he was not associated with Hamas. His name was Abdal Azam from Jenin. So Islamic feelings among the Palestinians are now nothing new. I mean, take the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, was the leader of the national movement of Palestinians, and as you know, collaborated with the Nazis in the Second World War. There also was, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. What made Hamas defined now, and until now I did not define them as such, but now I do as a Nazi organization, is what we already know. What we already know about what happened on the 7th of October and what was planned to happen if the initial attack would have been as successful as they wanted it to be, even though it was successful enough, tragically enough for Israel. Killing civilians, orders to kill civilians, beheading babies. Look, I need to tell you something, and many of our viewers need to understand it. When you look at pictures of Nazi officers shooting Jewish babies, and then you see what happened in the south of Israel for a few hours, tragic hours, on the 7th of October, you see the same. Then we know about publications that were found now when they are interrogated, a lot of them in Israel, with specific orders to go after schools, to go after hospitals, to go after civilians, and to kill them. Every people, whether it are Jews or the peoples of the Indian subcontinent or African continent or any other part of the world, they have their legacies, historic legacies. They have something which they take from the past as a guiding sense of how they view themselves to be in the present, how they perceive their role in the world of today. And for many Israelis, not surprisingly, the Holocaust is that defining event. And when you see the pictures from what happened in Israel, when you read the Hamas instructions to their own people, that's Nazism. That is Nazism. That's what it is. Now, having said that, means something else. Because if you're a Jewish state like Israel is, or the state of the Jewish people, and you define your enemy as Nazi, that means that you're going after them to the very end. So I will leave it at that before you come back and ask me about that. But if indeed the Israelis define Hamas as Nazi, that means that they have to do something else that they haven't yet done, and I doubt whether they will do. So, I mean, I can tell you they're a Nazi organization, but if you don't hear it from, say, the prime minister or ministers, it means that they are toning down the situation. But I will definitely call them a Nazi organization. I would not call the Palestinian other organizations such. Look, we have to define, and I will make this definition very, very distinctly. There is a major distinction between Hamas and other Palestinians. I will be the last person in the world to talk about Palestinians as such. I talk about Hamas in that case. No Palestinians. They are Palestinians. But I do not talk about the Palestinian people. I talk about the Palestinian movement called Hamas.
Brilliant. Now, let me ask you an inconvenient question. The Israeli government has negotiated with Hamas in the past. In fact, as per many reports, the Israeli government played divide and rule and promoted Hamas so that Fatah would weaken. There are allegations about this. Now, this is something that many people believe is an article of faith, particularly in the Arab world. So what do you say to that?
First of all, Hamas was established, as I said, in late 1987, 88, at a time when groups like this mushroomed all over the Muslim world. To think that the only people that did not have the ability to establish a Muslim movement are the Palestinians, and they needed Israel to do it for them. It's, among other things, let me tell you, my friend, is also patronizing toward the Palestinians and even racist, like the Palestinians cannot do this. Every other Muslim nation had their own fundamentalist movement, but not the Palestinians. The Israelis had to do it for them. That, of course, is nonsensical, not from you, but from those who say it. But look, politically speaking, once Hamas was there, obviously there was an interest to create schism between them and the PLO. And I would say, look, Netanyahu's policy in the last 15 years, among its fundamentals, I would say, was the idea that so long as Hamas there is in Gaza, the pressure on Israel about the Palestinian issue is lesser than what it could be otherwise, because who are the Palestinians, who represent them, what's the role of Hamas versus the PA, and so on and so forth. That doesn't mean that even if there was no such Israeli policy, Hamas would not have been what they are. Let me make another point here. Netanyahu might have this interest. Hamas did not share with him about that. They had other ideas in mind. So, look,
but
those who say it, let's be honest about it.
Hamas was convenient for Bibi, and in some ways, Bibi.
Well, yes, but Bibi, look, no, he did not foster them. He did not destroy them.
Okay.
And Netanyahu said, and of course it collapsed. He said that the main target was Iran, and that Israel should not waste its resources or too much of them over fighting a secondary, a less significant enemy like Hamas, whereas Israel has to prepare itself for the big battle against Iran with its nuclear program. I'll tell you now, the irony of all that is, and from an Israeli perspective, the tragic irony is, maybe every irony is tragic sometimes. The tragic irony is that now we have a fight in the south against Hamas and in the north against Hezbollah, and the Iranians are behind all that. So one can argue that this entire concept of Netanyahu failed. But that doesn't mean anything that beautifies, cleans the image of Hamas and what they are. If the Israelis made a mistake of perception about Hamas, that's their mistake, and it's a tragic mistake. Hamas is what Hamas is.
All right.
Hamas did not need Netanyahu to aid the Jews.
Point taken. And I'm well aware of the fact that Sheikh Yassin was one of the founders. I'm well aware that it actually began with the Intifada back actually even before the 90s, in the late 1980s. Actually.
Late 1980s, yeah.
Yes, so I'm well aware of Hamas, and it is a fundamentalist political Islam movement. And I'm also well aware that anti-Semitism has been a part of modern political Islam. And it goes back not just to the Mufti, as you said, but even to people like Hassan al-Banna of Egypt and Sayyid Qutb. Now, let's...
Oh, yeah, definitely. But let me, sorry to interrupt you about it. Again, I would say to you, we all need to always say anti-Semitism has always been fundamental to elements in Islam, not everyone, not necessarily even the majority. Hezbollah is, by the way, anti-Semitic as well. I mean, that's something else. We don't talk about them now.
Look, after the Inquisition in 1492, the Jews were living in the Ottoman Empire, which is why a lot of Ottoman Jews, Sephardic Jews, speak Ladino, which is medieval Spanish.
Yeah, they still speak Ladino. Yeah, the Ladino music is very good. I like it a lot.
Yeah. All right. So now let's get to something more immediate. We talked about Bibi Netanyahu. Bibi Netanyahu's coalition was a coalition of the crazies. There were millenarian, messianic characters. There were people who talked about ethnic cleansing for the Palestinians. So has there been a decline in the body politic? in Israeli democracy, and has that affected the security of the country?
Well, first of all, there are bad apples in this coalition. I would say very, very bad apples, and I am very strong critique of them. But let's break down what you said, what you asked, which is a big question, into various elements here. And let me start with the question of ethnic cleansing. Let me give you some facts. The facts cannot be disputed. If people want to dispute them, it's in their way to do it. It's their prerogative. But in 1967, when Israel took Gaza in a war of self-defense, there were 350,000 people in Gaza.
The famous Six-Day War.
Sorry? The
famous Six-Day War, yes.
The war of self-defense, as I define it, there were 350,000 people in Gaza. There are today 2.1 million. Mm-hmm. So all this talk about ethnic cleansing and genocide are nonsensical. Mm-hmm. In 1948, by the way, when Gaza was under Egyptian control, the Grand Mufti declared on the 21st of October, 1948, the government of all Palestine in Gaza. The Egyptians threw him out and prevented a Palestinian statehood to be established in Gaza. So let's put aside all this nonsense about genocide and ethnic cleansing. It doesn't exist. There is no.
It's not that there is genocide, but there have been members of the cabinet who have had...
I'm coming today. I'm coming. Yeah. I'll address every point. Trust me, I will address. So there is no ethnic cleansing. There is no genocide. We'll come to those who might have said it or not. We'll come to that. Now, now, the point I make it here is simply a factual point. People need to know it. Yes, the only ethnic cleansing, by the way, that did take place in the Middle East is that there are no Jews in Arab countries. Only a few thousand left. And by the way, almost 50%, maybe 50% of the Israeli Jewish population are descendants of refugees from Arab countries. And they, by the way, are the backbone of the current coalition. They vote for the current coalition by 80+%. Okay. Now, in this government, there are some elements which should not have been there.
I mean, the government has changed now. You have a national unity government.
Yeah, I'm saying, okay, we'll come to that. We'll come. Yeah. Trust me, we'll come. I'm trying to think, like in a structural way.
Yeah.
Bezalel, Smotrich, and Itamar Ben-Gvir are far from being my favorites, you can imagine. They should not have been there. Mm-hmm. Their inclusion in the government is not about the Palestinian situation. Mm-hmm. Their inclusion in the government was about something else. The debate in Israel, which exploded before this war started, about the role of the judicial system and all that, yes. Which had, of course, implications over the Palestinian situation, but it wasn't based on that, necessarily or primarily. Mm-hmm. Some of these ministers make stupid, idiotic statements that I will be the first to condemn. No one is having any plan to genocide, ethnic cleansing of Arabs and all that. That's nonsense. And it should not be part of the agenda. And whoever says it in Israel, whether minister or not, throw this stuff to the dustbin. Okay. The current government will come to that. The Hamas people themselves, when you listen to what people say outside of the Middle East, those who are hiding now in Qatar or wherever and make statements, they say that the preparations for this war started over a year ago, if not even 2 years ago, before the establishment of this government. This government was very mild in its attitude toward the Palestinians in Gaza, because for the religious right wing in Israel, the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, this is what's important, not Gaza.
Exactly. Yeah.
So again, let's put it in context. Now we come to the current configuration. As of now, and we have to say it, we are talking on Monday, the 16th of October. As of now, the impact of the new faction in government, the Benny Gantz, Gideon Saar faction, I haven't seen yet any impact of them. I'm waiting to see it, and I hope that there will be an impact. I just want to caution you. Some members of this group of Gantz Saar are very hawkish. Gideon Saar was the hawkish wing of the Likud party. He left Likud over Netanyahu, not over ideology and policies. Mm-hmm. So we'll see what happens. We'll see. I don't know. They just entered, and nothing has yet happened. We'll see what happens. Mm-hmm. But to sum up this answer, the war in Gaza, if you really look to the fundamentals of it, it's Hamas ideology and all that, it is the failure of the Israeli government since 2009, Netanyahu governments, to deal with Hamas in a way that would have prevented it from happening. And that's coming back to what we said already before.
Yeah.
They call it the policy of containment. It failed. Netanyahu allowed money from Qatar to enter Gaza. You know that, $15 million every month.
Yes.
The Palestinians are the largest recipients per capita of foreign aid in the world. And the money went what in Gaza? To hospitals? No. To schools? No. To housing for refugees, whether right or wrong refugee, real refugees or not? No. It went only for arms. And that was the mistake. That's always the mistake when you try to bribe rogue regimes by money. The same goes with Iran, the same goes with Hamas.
So Netanyahu himself is under corruption allegations. Netanyahu has pushed through judicial reforms. And when he pushed through judicial reforms, 10,000 IDF reservists threatened to go on strike.
But they all are serving now, yeah.
They are. But
all
the point
of them.
is, absolutely. I mean, Israel is a modern day Sparta. But my question for you is that did all this domestic division, A, hinder military preparation, and B, encourage Hamas?
Well, first of all, Israel is not a modern Sparta. Israel is a modern center of technology, education, medical innovations, and a lot of stuff that, by the way, could have happened. These people in Gaza, you know that the members of the families of Haniyeh and Sinwar, the leaders of Hamas, have been treated in Israel. I think the sister of Haniyeh was treated in Israel, and so on. Okay, look. Netanyahu made a terrible mistake about all this judicial reform. And by the way, it's dead now, you know, but that's another story. It may have created an impression of weakness in Israel. I agree. It may have encouraged the sense of people that we can do it now to Israel because of see what is happening. That definitely could be. That's not the reason for their attack on Israel in this timing, and I would not blame, even for 1 second, the protest movement in Israel. Now, about the spirit in Israel, I just read something before I came to this program with you, Mr. Singh. So it's an Israeli reserve officer, his rank is major. In civilian life, is the director of an high school somewhere. And he says, look, everybody reported to duty in our battalion. We found out that we are still lacking one driver for an armored carrier. For whatever reason, somebody did not, and that particular job. So he said, what could I do? So I published on WhatsApp, I need one driver for armored carrier. Within seconds, 70 volunteers. That's the spirit in Israel, and it is because Israeli society is very, very strong, despite all the nonsense about the breakup and breakdown of Israeli society and all that. There are cracks always in every society when you deal with fundamental issues like the judicial reform that the government of Netanyahu wanted to legislate. There's no question about that. But in a democracy, and that's what matters really is, in a democracy, you can have a debate of that kind and still the overall ties of national solidarity are intact. I will also mention to you something that maybe our American viewers would understand. Despite 40 weeks of massive protest, hundreds of thousands of people, not even one was killed. No 6th of January in Israel. So, let's put it therefore also in a contextual perspective. Let's move on, yeah.
So now that you've talked about cracks in Israeli society, let me ask you a question about the Haredis, who are 13.3% of the population. They don't serve in the military. They don't pay taxes.
Oh, many of them do, not enough.
Not enough. All right, some of them do. And that is a big fault line between the secular Jews, let's say the creme de la creme of Israeli society, who run the Mossad, the Sayeret Matkal, the Unit 200, and so on and so forth, and of course, the more religious elements who are politically very hawkish, but do not pay the price in blood and treasure. So educate our listeners and viewers about this fault line.
Yeah, it's a good question. Very good question. All your questions are very good. You know something about this area. Where do you know it all from? Well,
From you guys.
I expect Fair Observer. You know, I used to write to Fair Observer in the past. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know. I'm sure you remember that. Yeah.
No,
Look,
very well. And we want you to write again.
yeah, we'll do.
Yeah.
Look, religious people in Israel are divided and subdivided into so many groups and all that. That's not the time to start getting into all that. And I'm not sure that I'm the right person at any rate to talk about that. But look, among the ultra-Orthodox, there are, again, various subgroups, you know, very small minority, marginal, but sometimes vocal and irritating, of those who oppose the very existence of the state. You know, you see them sometimes in New York or in Jerusalem, few hundreds, few tens, I mean, not 1,000 even, but, you know, okay.
I had the misfortune of sitting next to one on a long flight.
Yeah. No, so there are some of those, but they are really not even marginal. They simply are, you know, they are episodal note. But look, it's a problem. But the role of religion altogether in the public life of Israel is a little bit more complicated than what people think. I would define, I wrote about it one time, between religious and feeling and religiosity.
Mhm.
What does it mean, religiosity? You have a soccer team. It's a true story. They lose. What does their coach do? He says, you know what? We need to do something to change our fortunes. So he takes the team to the grave of a tzaddik, righteous rabbi, to pray there. And then they drive on Saturday to the game. So what do you take out of that? Imagine any of the NFL teams would have done something like that. There would be such a scandal in America and so on and so on, NBA or whatever.
And if it was in
on
Europe,
Yom Kippur, I'll give you
it
another
would be
example.
worse.
Yeah,
If
well,
it was in
just
Europe,
before
it
what
would be
happened
worse.
now,
Mhm.
just before what happened now, on Yom Kippur, there was an interruption of the public prayer in Tel Aviv by some of the anti-Netanyahu protesters. That was a turning point already a week before the war started in the protest movement. It
Mhm.
created major cracks there because people said, anti-Netanyahu, yes. Anti-judicial reform, yes. Even saying that we shall not serve in reserve, yes. But interrupting public prayer of Yom Kippur, for whatever reason, that is too much. So the role of the Haredis element in society is a problematic one. They get a lot of government budget that they should not get. They have more political power than, if you ask me, they should have, but it's a democracy.
No, that's
If there
also
are,
your proportional representation system.
yeah, well,
which
encourages
means,
it. Encourages
yeah,
it. You know,
exactly.
there are 17 already
Yeah,
members of the Knesset.
exactly.
They have power, and that's what it is.
Yeah.
Or almost 20 with the people of the Ben Gvir group, or whatever you would call them. So, look, I think, and that's too much, I mean, too early to say it maybe, but while we are still in the turmoil that we are in and the war, I think that as a result of this war, Israel will do something or go through something that it went through after the Yom Kippur War. The Yom Kippur War led to the creation of what I would call the Second Israeli Republic, the end of the Labour Party domination. Within 3 years or so, there were the elections, they lost, and so on. The rise of Likud and the religious right wing and whatever it came with it. Now it will be the beginning of the Third Israeli Republic. And it will be a challenge to secular or less religious parties to decide on their priorities and how to create new political configurations and coalitions. So I expect that to happen. But again, that's for our next discussion because it is not something that has already happened. But I believe that after this war will be over, it will be because this war is touching upon many, many fundamental structural points of the Israeli situation.
Now, Joseph, I'm very glad you mentioned the Third Israeli Republic and the Yom Kippur War. During Yom Kippur, many of our viewers and listeners may not know, this happened 6 October 1973, exactly 50 years and a day before this attack on 7th of October. And on that day, Egypt and Syria attacked together. And the Egyptians made tremendous progress. They had established armored divisions on the eastern bank of the Suez. At that time, Israel had Sinai after the Six-Day War. And even the Syrians, they pushed at Golan Heights.
For 48 hours only.
Sorry?
For 48 hours only.
48 hours only, that's correct. But Israel suffered a lot of casualties and was able to push them back. And of course, Ariel Sharon launched a great attack across the Suez, a counterattack, and so on and so forth. That was an existential war. This war, it's not existential. You don't have Egypt and Syria, and in that war, Iraq got involved as well. Morocco got involved too. So in this war, you don't have a war with states, but the Arabs treat, and I'm watching videos coming from Morocco, coming from Jordan, coming from Egypt in Al-Azhar. The whole of the Middle East seems to be up in flames again. So what are the similarities? What are the differences? What are the risks?
Well, the similarities and the differences are obvious. Yes, it was more dangerous to Israel in October of 1973 than what it is now. So let me, again, break down my answer point by point. First of all, in terms of the euphoria in the Arab world, let me remind people in the Middle East, there was the 22nd of June, 1941 in the Soviet Union. And we know what happened in April of 1945 in Berlin. That was the 7th of December, 1941 in Hawaii. And we know what happened in September 2nd upon the USS Missouri off the shores of Tokyo. Here, Hamas, they could celebrate their initial success, but the outcome would be very, very bad for them. Very, very, very bad for them. And I don't want to get into these definitions of destruction, complete, and so, but it will be very, very, very bad for them. Extremely bad. It's already starting to be, it will be much more. Second point is the euphoria in the Arab world shows to us something else altogether, which is the peace that is being done by political leaderships does not, I should say, necessarily infiltrate or filter through to peoples at large. And that's a problem. But pay attention also to where you do not see these popular elements of support in the Gulf countries. Very interesting. Where you see it's interesting, and where you don't see it is also interesting. The third point really is that, look, in the Yom Kippur War, armies fought each other. In the first 4, 5, or 6 hours of the war now, Hamas fought Israeli civilians. Another question is why the slow reaction by the IDF and all that came with it. That will be inquired. There was a big, big, big major failure of Israel, no question. But this time, it wasn't a war against military, it was against civilians.
Yeah.
And I will throw to you something else here that will surprise you, which is somewhat speculative. We all speculate when events are happening, so we can't be sure. The date, why was it picked? I do not rule out that they knew about the party, the open air festival, and they thought that this would give them the best opportunity to murder civilians. Wait and see what we'll find out about that. Hundreds of the casualties, almost 40% of the entire casualties of the first day were in this festival, were young people, including, by the way, many foreigners, tourists, and civilians of many countries, and celebrated open-air music and were slaughtered.
This was a festival for peace, and most of the people here were
I'm about to say, and were slaughtered while singing for peace.
Yeah,
and you know who understood it? Bono. The great Bono understood it. And he said it in his open-air concert in wherever it was in London, whenever it was, just a few days ago. And so I don't know if it wasn't there for the date attached to this. I'm not sure. It's speculation, but it indicates to you what really is the feeling in Israel, that they were after civilians. So that's not the Yom Kippur War of 73.
Yeah.
But as I said before, remember how the Yom Kippur ended. They are going to go through the same process, these guys in Gaza, and they will deserve it.
Okay, very quickly. I heard Yuval Noah Harari speaking on The Rest is Politics. He was speaking to Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell.
I saw it, I watched it, yeah.
Yeah. And he talked about how the Hamas fighters attacked kibbutzim, which are basically left-leaning now. So
that's my point. That's Nazi. They don't care. Jews are Jews are Jews are Jews.
Yeah, but his point was that now there is so much anger, so much emotion that Israel is going to react firmly. My question to you is, can Israel perhaps be overreacting in a state of emotion?
Well, for us sitting in a more relaxed and peaceful situation to talk about emotions when this happens, it's a little bit of a luxurious state of mind. Remember what happened in America after 9/11. Proportionally, what happened in Israel is 40,000 people in America. Lynchings of people in America against 6 people, you remember. And what America did in Afghanistan. So with all due respect, look, I heard and watched Yuval Noah Harari, and what I understood from it was something else.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you what I understood from it. I understood from it the change of political attitudes in Israel that is happening now and that will have effects after the war.
Mm-hmm.
Is how people are putting aside long-held beliefs about the Israeli-Palestinian situation and are moving to another direction. Yuval Noah Harari, I'm sure I don't have to talk for him. He is not changing. He's still left of center and all that. But the way other people like him talking, people in Israel like Yaron London, I would tell you, some of the left-wing generals and so on and so forth.
I'm in Washington today. I'm in Washington, D.C., sitting in Washington. Yeah.
Okay. And so, so you may, but still you follow what's happening. Look, the change of political mood is very, very interesting and significant. And it reminds me of how it was during the Yom Kippur War. Yom Kippur War was the end of the Labour Party. Likud got about 10 more seats in the elections of 1973 and became on the doorstep and then became the ruling party. It was so obvious it would be like that.
And Menachem
whether
Begin
Likud will survive it or...
Menachem Begin, formerly of
Begin finally came to power democratically and the second Israeli Republic, if you will. I mean, that's my way of defining it. I think that Likud as a party will survive it or not, they will get in the next elections this amount of votes or that amount of votes. It doesn't matter. There will be a different configuration, but it will not. If I have to predict now, and I'm saying it in public, so we'll see what happens. If I have to predict it, Israeli politics will not change in a way that will be more accommodating to an Israeli-Palestinian situation. They will not.
Understood. Now this brings me to a point your brother made, the former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, on the BBC. And he said that first we have to deal with Hamas, and then we have to get Bibi out of power because he's proven to be incompetent. Words to this effect, not exactly. And there seems to be a lot of anger against Bibi right now in sections of Israeli society, especially amongst some of my friends who are officers in the IDF.
Likud ministers are being attacked when they publicly visit now cemeteries and hospitals, which has never happened before. And we'll say about Netanyahu personally, I don't want to get into that, but I can tell you that the level of anger is huge. It reminds me of the Yom Kippur War. I was there at the Yom Kippur War. I was a reservist. I fought in the Golan Heights. And yes, there will be changes. There will be major changes. But if I look at the direction of the anger, it is combined of two elements that might be contradictory. There's a lot of anger about the performance of Israel in the first hours and what led to that, which means against the government. But the anger toward the Palestinians is nothing that I've witnessed until now in all my life. And I am in my early 70s, not exactly a spring chicken, and that will have political implications and partisan political implications.
Well, so this brings me on to another question. What does this mean for relations with other Arab countries and for peace between Israelis and Palestinians?
Well, there are two elements here. Gaza, to start with, what will happen in Gaza? And then we'll move. Here is the irony. and I talked about that before, if indeed, if, because of the current style of the campaign or any change with regard to some kind of ground offensive and so on and so forth, Hamas is really destroyed, or at least weakened to the point of not being able to resist more pressures, the question will be who should control Gaza? And you know what will happen? The PO, the PA under Abbas will be the candidates to do it. So that will be the total reversal of Netanyahu's strategy for 15 years. Split between Hamas and the PA in order to weaken them both. The PA might get Gaza. There will have to be an injection of a lot of money in all this and supervision of how the money is used. Of course, Gaza will have to be totally demilitarized and so on and so forth. Now, that's about Gaza, but that's a prediction that I have, which might sound a bit more optimistic. I mean, in the end of the day, it's not bearing, it's not killing political options. But that will have to be a different Gaza. And Egypt will have to contribute to that as well. In all kinds of ways. They will have to be compensated generously for doing it. Okay, all this, I wrote about 5 or 6 years ago already about the idea that solution to Gaza and the West Bank should be in a regional context. Jordan should have to help about the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, and Egypt about Gaza. But okay, about the other Arab countries. Here I will surprise you with my answer. If Israel is coming out of this one looking weak, that's a danger to the peace process. If Israel coming out of that looking strong despite what happened, that's a positive contribution. I know it sounds ironic, it sounds contradictory in terms, it's not. It's not. And we'll see what happens.
So
I also want to make another point here. Let me just finish one more point, please.
Yeah, please.
From an historic perspective, the Yom Kippur War ended up in a way that at least Egypt came out stronger. In the end of that decade, what happened in the Middle East was the Lebanese Civil War, 75 onward, the tore apart the Arab world, and then the Iraq-Iran war after the Islamic revolution in Iran, and in between the Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty. That is to say, Israel came out of the Yom Kippur strong enough to show to Arabs that this is it. It's a fact of life. It's not going to change. But that's why the logic of my answer to you until now is there. The results of this war in terms of the perceptions of it, the impressions of it will determine a great deal.
Right. So to make the point I was trying to make earlier, you believe that if Arab countries smell blood, they will circle like sharks around Israel.
I don't want to. Okay. You are more colorful. I don't want to. Yeah, no, look. If they smell blood and they misunderstand the changes that will take in Israel, to interpret it as a sign of weakness, it will be bad.
Okay, now here's another question. Today, Palestinian Israelis are 20% of your population, and they are growing at a faster rate than
no, they are not, by the way. They are
not?
not growing anymore at a faster rate. That's interesting demographic changes take place. Yeah. The birth rate among Palestinians altogether, but among Israeli Arabs in particular and Israeli Jews are almost comparable.
I see.
You'll be surprised to hear that. But okay, let's move on. Yeah. But they're 20% at any rate, yeah.
Yeah. So given the fact you have a sizable Arab minority in a Jewish state, does that create future rifts and tensions within Israeli democracy?
Would, but it doesn't. This round, the Israeli Arabs are. There are cases, of course, on the internet and all this of incitement and so, but nothing really happened. And even the leader of the Joint Arab List, Ayman Oda, who otherwise would be anti-Israel on every issue, called upon Hamas to stop the incitement of Israeli Arabs and so on and so forth, and condemned what's happening. And, there are interesting demonstrations and displays of Arab support for Israel among Israeli Arabs, and some less significant, by the way, of hostility to Israel. So I'm a bit more optimistic about that. But the overall question of the role of Israeli Arabs in a state which is the nation state of the Jewish people, and so it should be, is an interesting situation. Look, you have an Arab Supreme Court judge, you have Arab parties in the Knesset, the leader of the Islamic movement in Israel, Mansour Abbas, almost ended up in a coalition with Bibi a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And things are happening all over the place. You have a group of mayors, for example, the mayor of Nazareth, who are having different policies than others. So it's not a homogeneous group altogether, and we have to look at it also from that perspective. All this will unfold, all this will happen. We'll see what happens, but right now, if indeed the situation in Gaza will stay as it is, it will be a test for some Arabs who really are looking to an opportunity to go against Israeli Arabs. But I don't think they reflect more than a small minority of Arabs in Israel, but they exist. A lot of the other people would tell you, no. According to interest, by the way, you will be surprised to hear that they measure, the UN. The UN have the index of happiness of people in the world. I don't know if you're aware of it.
I'm well aware of it. Yeah.
In 2023.
In fact, the King of Bhutan and I were together at Oxford, and he's pushing the happiness index a lot.
Okay. In 2022, Israel was number 4 in the world, which means that the majority of Israeli Arabs said they are very happy to be there as well. Yeah, you can check it. You can check it. I know that some of your viewers hear this time when we talk for the first time a lot of facts. Well, it's a challenge for them to check it.
Brilliant. Now, I'll ask you one final question, and that is about your claim that Israel will see a third republic. And you've mentioned after the Yom Kippur War, the Labour Party basically suffered. What happens after this war? Do we see Israel turning into more of a far-right nation?
No, it's a different type of right wing, because Likud will not be able to be what they are now. I don't know if they will not be suffering the way Labor today, according to polls, are 1.3% in Israel. They're finished. They still have 4 members in the Knesset, but if elections were today, they are out. The other left-wing party, Meretz, are in the polls 4 to 6. That's it. The Israeli left wing is narrowed to 4 to 6 out of 120. Marginal.
So the left has really been left out.
The left is left out, and for all kinds of reasons. And by the way, I wrote a review in the Middle East Journal about a book written by great Israeli historian Avi Shiloh, about the demise of the left wing in Israel. Well, he focused it on the personality of Yossi Beilin, if you know, but looked at it like the Labour Party and all this.
Yeah.
The far right are not going to disappear, but they are going to be. They are having a problem. They are having a problem because they have to explain why is it that they are so focused on the West Bank or Judea and Samaria. And so look at what's happening here, maybe the entire strategy of Israel should have been to go after this, not after the other area where there are most of the settlers.
Very quickly, our viewers should know that a lot of these people have been pushing for settlements in the West Bank. And for the last
So
few
the question will be, why did you push?
And
why did you push for the West Bank when the real danger was there, and so on and so forth? Otherwise, So we'll see. I think that the Israeli center, the people that were in the streets before it all started, they will have a problem because Gantz being in the government now and Lapid is not marginal phenomenon. It is the beginning of a split in this big group of people. And then we'll see what the result of all this are. The governments after this war will not be anything like left of center. Forget it. And they're not going to be extreme right-wing either. The Israeli center will be there, but the Israeli center might be split. And the beginning of it is already now with Lapid saying, no, I don't want to be in anything close to Netanyahu or Likud. Gantz is in. Lieberman, by the way, wants to be in. Lots to be in. So it shows to you that to start with all this protest movement was not really left-wing. It was the center. That's what's so interesting. So all this remains to be seen. It's speculative, of course. I don't know. First of all, the war is still there. We'll see what happens. Let me end up something personal. Look, it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy on every level imaginable that you can think of. It's a tragedy about everything that happens. It's a tragedy, tragedy, tragedy. It should not have happened. But it does happen. It is happening. It's not time anymore to say why it happened, but more so to look at what's happening and what will happen. The real challenge should be how to go beyond all that and still try to do what was done before with the realization that there should be changes about what we did. The distinction between those who want to destroy you and those who want to talk to you, for example, and so on and so forth. It also refers to public opinion in the West. Let me tell you something about that. There's a new book by a Jewish writer called Dara Orn. It's called The World Loves Dead Jews. I recommend people to read it because she then says, and she's right, people like to rebuild old Jewish cemeteries, to establish statues to the Jews of the Holocaust, to do this, to do that. In the first 2 days of the war, there was a lot of support for Israel. Now there is more criticism, what you're doing in Gaza and all that. Many Israelis will not forget these lessons as well. We know now better what people think about us, and we have no illusions. And I have it also in my university, where the still spirit is pro-Israel, but we'll see. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you for your time. We look forward to our next conversation and to your next article. Thank you for making time on a very busy day. You have 3 lectures. So good luck.
Only 3, yeah. Take care.
All the best.
Enjoy.
Bye.
Have a nice week. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.